Saint Thérèse of Lisieux once said that the greatest mistake a soul can make is believing that Jesus asks for something complicated. According to her, the guidance of God does not arrive wrapped in thunder or announced by visions that leave no room for doubt. It arrives the way light arrives in a room where the curtains have been drawn back just slightly, not flooding everything at once, but making enough visible to take the next step. And she learned this not in a moment of mystical clarity, but in the long, quiet, sometimes bewildering process of living a life she had not entirely chosen, inside circumstances she could not entirely control, with a trust she had to rebuild in small pieces almost every day. Have you ever stood at a crossroads in your own life and genuinely not known whether the direction you were moving was yours or God's? Have you ever prayed for clarity and received only silence and wondered whether the silence meant you were on the right path or whether it meant you were asking the wrong question entirely? Have you ever confused your own longing with divine guidance and then spent months or years trying to untangle one from the other? These are not the questions of a weak faith. They are the questions of an honest one. And Thérèse of Lisieux, the young woman who entered a Carmelite convent at 15 and died at 24, having written one of the most widely read spiritual autobiographies in Christian history, lived inside those questions with a depth and a transparency that still disarms people who come to her expecting easy answers. If you want to go deeper into the lives of the saints and bring what you find there into the reality of your own life, subscribe now. Every week on this channel we do exactly that, not to admire from a distance, but to learn in a way that actually changes something. To understand how Thérèse came to recognize God's guidance, you first need to understand what she was working with. She was not a woman who received constant interior confirmation that she was on the right path. She was not surrounded by signs that made discernment simple. Her desire to enter Carmel, which she felt from a very young age, with an intensity that she described as a consuming thirst, was met not with immediate doors opening, but with obstacle after obstacle. Her father initially resisted. The local superior told her she was too young. She traveled to Rome on pilgrimage and, in a moment of extraordinary boldness, broke protocol during an audience with Pope Leo XIII to ask him personally for permission to enter the convent early. He did not give her the answer she wanted. He told her she would enter if God willed it, and she went home to wait, in the particular anguish of someone who is certain of a calling and completely uncertain of its timing. This is the first thing she teaches about knowing whether God is guiding you. The presence of resistance is not evidence of the wrong path. She did not interpret the obstacles as signs that she had misread her vocation. She interpreted them as part of the path itself, as the territory through which the genuine call had to travel before it could be received. And in that interpretation, she made a distinction that most people in her position would not have the spiritual maturity to make. She distinguished between the desire and the timing. She held the desire as real and God-given, while releasing the timing entirely. She wrote that she placed her longing in God's hands the way you place something fragile in the hands of someone you trust completely, not because you stop caring about it, but because you have decided that their handling of it is safer than your own. She entered Carmel in April of 1888 at 15 years old, and what she found inside was not the confirmation she might have expected from finally arriving at the place she had fought so hard to reach. The convent was difficult. The prioress at the time, Mother Marie de Gonzague, was a complex and sometimes harsh woman whose treatment of Thérèse was, by any honest reading, severe. She was frequently corrected in front of others. Her spiritual director was largely unavailable to her. The warmth she had imagined, the sense of finally being where she belonged, surrounded by souls as hungry for God as she was, gave way to something far more austere, far more demanding, and far less emotionally satisfying than her longing had painted it. And yet, she did not conclude from any of this that she had been wrong. She did not interpret the difficulty as a sign that God had misled her. Instead, she did something that requires a particular kind of interior freedom to do. She separated the question of God's guidance from the question of her own comfort. She understood, and this understanding cost her something real to arrive at. that God's guidance does not guarantee pleasant circumstances. It guarantees presence. It guarantees that the path you are on, however difficult, is being walked with someone who knows where it leads, even when you cannot see beyond the next turning. She wrote about this with an image that has stayed with generations of readers. She described herself as a little ball in the hands of the child Jesus, something he could pick up, set down, play with, put aside, and return to whenever he chose. The image sounds passive until you understand what she was actually describing. She was not describing indifference to her own life. She was describing a freedom from the need to control the narrative of that life. The little ball does not resist being set down. It does not demand to be held at all times. It is available. It is present. And in that complete availability, it is never truly abandoned because it belongs to the one who holds it. This matters enormously for anyone trying to discern whether God is guiding them right now, because one of the most common mistakes people make in discernment is expecting that God's guidance will feel like certainty. They wait for the interior sense of absolute clarity, the moment where every doubt dissolves, and the path forward is unmistakable, and the confirmation is so complete that faith no longer requires any effort at all. And when that feeling does not come, they conclude either that they have not yet found God's will, or that God is withholding guidance, or that they are spiritually insufficient to receive it clearly. Thérèse never had that kind of certainty. She had something different. She had a persistent, quiet, sometimes barely perceptible orientation, a sense, not always felt, but always returned to, that the direction she was moving was consonant with the love she had placed at the center of her life. She trusted her deepest desires not because she was naive about the capacity for self-deception, but because she had done the slow work of purifying those desires. Through prayer, through surrender, through the repeated small acts of choosing love over self-interest, until the shape of her wanting began to match the shape of what God was asking. There is a passage in Story of a Soul where she writes about her understanding of her vocation within the church. She had read St. Paul's letters about the different members of the body of Christ, the apostles, the prophets, the teachers, the workers of miracles, and she felt a burning desire for all of it. She wanted to be everything. She wanted to reach everywhere. She felt a love so large that no single role seemed capable of containing it. And in that excess of desire, she received what she described as a sudden interior light, the recognition that love was not one vocation among many, but the foundation of all of them, that her vocation was simply to be love in the heart of the church, not a specific work, not a defined role, love itself, expressed through whatever circumstances each day brought. This is how she recognized God's guidance in her own life, not by receiving a map, not by being shown the destination, but by discovering, at the center of her deepest and most persistent desires, something that pointed beyond herself, something that, the more it was purified of self-interest, the more clearly it resembled the character of the one she was trying to follow. She wrote that she had finally understood her place, and that in understanding it, a peace came over her that she described as the calm of a sailor who finally sees the lighthouse from the middle of a storm. Not the end of the sea, not the disappearance of the waves, but the fixed point, the light that does not move. The practical application of this for your own life is more accessible than it might first appear. Thérèse is not describing a mystical experience available only to those with extraordinary spiritual gifts. She is describing a process of interior attention that anyone willing to be honest with themselves can undertake. It begins with a question she implicitly asked herself throughout her life. Not, "What do I want?" but "What do I want when I have stripped away everything that is about my own image, my own comfort, my own need to be seen or validated or successful?" What remains when you remove those layers is not always dramatic. Often it is quiet. Often it is small. Often it is a persistent, gentle pull in a direction that requires trust because it does not come with guarantees. She was also remarkably honest about the role of peace in discernment. She did not describe the peace she felt as the absence of difficulty or the resolution of doubt. She described it as something that coexisted with difficulty, a deep water stillness beneath the surface turbulence. She wrote about her final years when tuberculosis was quietly destroying her lungs and spiritual darkness had settled over her prayer life like a heavy curtain, and she maintained that even in those conditions, the fundamental direction of her life felt right, not comfortable, not confirmed by consolation, but right in the way that a road is right even when it runs through difficult terrain, because it is still going somewhere, because it is still the road you were meant to take, because abandoning it would mean something worse than the difficulty of continuing on it. This kind of peace is a reliable indicator of God's guidance in a way that emotional consolation never quite is. Consolation can be produced by many things, by circumstances going well, by the flattery of others, by the temporary relief of avoiding a difficult decision. But the deep water peace that Thérèse describes, the peace that remains present even when consolation has completely disappeared, is harder to manufacture and harder to sustain without a real foundation. When it is there, beneath all the noise and difficulty and uncertainty of a particular season, it is worth paying attention to. When it is genuinely absent, not merely suppressed by anxiety, but truly absent even after the anxiety has been brought to prayer, that absence is also worth paying attention to. Thérèse also teaches something about the relationship between God's guidance and ordinary fidelity that tends to get overlooked in favor of the more dramatic aspects of discernment. She noticed, and documented with careful attention, that the moments when she felt most clearly aligned with God's will were almost never the moments of extraordinary prayer or mystical experience. They were the moments of ordinary faithfulness, the moment of choosing kindness over irritation, the moment of returning to prayer after falling asleep in it, the moment of doing the small hidden work well, with full attention and full love, even when no one was watching and no reward was visible. In those moments, something in her recognized a rightness, a fit between what she was doing and what she was made for, that was quieter than vision, but more reliable than feeling. She wrote that she had come to understand holiness not as a ladder to be climbed towards some eventual encounter with God, but as a door that was already open, that every small act of faithful love was not a step toward the door, but a step through it. And that recognition, the sense that you are not approaching God but already with Him, not proving yourself worthy of guidance but already walking inside it, is perhaps the most honest description of what divine guidance actually feels like from the inside, not a voice from above directing your steps, a presence beside you in the steps you are already taking. She made mistakes. She was clear about that too. She misjudged situations. She carried expectations into Carmel that reality slowly dismantled. She wanted things that were not given to her, a longer life, the missionary work she had dreamed of, the heroic martyrdom she had once imagined as the shape her love for God would take. None of those desires were fulfilled in the form she had imagined them. And what she learned from that, slowly, through the specific kind of education that only disappointment can provide, was that God's guidance does not always move in the direction of your desires. Sometimes it moves through the dissolution of them. Sometimes the guidance is precisely the experience of wanting something completely and not receiving it, and discovering, inside that want and that refusal, a deeper freedom than fulfillment would have given you. She wrote about offering her unfulfilled desires to Jesus the way you offer anything small and precious, with open hands, without demanding them back, with the trust that the one receiving them knows what to do with them better than you do. This was not resignation. This was not the spiritual equivalent of pretending you do not want what you want. It was something far more demanding, the willingness to hold your desires lightly enough that God could either fulfill them or transform them without your grip preventing either outcome. This is the final thing she teaches about knowing whether God is guiding you. You know it not by the resolution of uncertainty, but by the quality of your surrender inside it. You know it when you can hold the unanswered question without it destroying your peace. You know it when the path you are on, however difficult, however different from what you imagined, carries within it a thread of love that you can trace back to the one who placed it there. You know it when the deepest thing in you, beneath the fear, beneath the confusion, beneath the unmet desire, is still turned toward God. Not because you have achieved spiritual perfection, but because you have decided in small ways and large ones that turning toward Him is the only direction that makes the rest of the journey make sense. That turning, that persistent, quiet, sometimes barely perceptible orientation of the soul toward love. That, for Thérèse, was the signature of divine guidance. Not certainty, not clarity, not the absence of darkness, but the presence, inside all of it, of a love that does not waver even when everything around it does. And she would say to you, with the gentleness and the precision that characterized everything she wrote, that if you can find that thread inside your own life, however thin it currently feels, however obscured by the noise of everything pressing in, then you are already being guided. You always were.